Well, hello everyone. Good morning. It's still morning, 11 o'clock. We will wait as the numbers continue to rise for today's session. Red Team, how threat actors gain initial access into corporate environments by Sadi. So, as people are joining, I'll just give people a minute or two to start joining in. For those who don't know, my name is Lee Cramp. I am the Deputy Director over at the Department of Health and Social Care. I have responsibility I am the Data Protection Officer. I also have the title of DRO, so Departmental Records Officer, and also Information Security. So quite a lot going on there. Like to get the most out of us and out the budget. So yeah, that's me. That's my background. Oh, there's a nice little picture of me I've just seen come up as well. Hi, that's me. Yeah, Information Security, Departmental Records Office, and DPO. So I have an amazing team. So we'll crack on. Hi everyone. Yeah, hi Des. Hope you're all right. Let us know how people are doing, where you are, what your soft furnishings are surrounding you today. Not great in my office today. It's just white walls. Hi, Cardiff. Love a little bit of Cardiff. Love Wales. So our supporters. So we've got to thank our supporters and our sponsors, without which we wouldn't be where we are today. And we would not be able to put on such great events throughout the SASIG. So as you can see on the screen now, we've got some amazing supporters. None more so than BSI today sponsoring this one and allowing us some time again with Sadi to go through this. So thanks to all our amazing sponsors and BSI for supporting the SASIG to put on these great events. So upcoming events, as you can see there on the screen, we've got some amazing events coming up, including prizing open today's information operation threat landscape. It's on Wednesday, the 5th of October. The cyber skills gap, attracting the next generation of talent, Friday, the 7th of October. We've got a new era of security operations, Monday, the 10th of October. And then bridging the communication gaps between execs and infosec specialists. Oh, I think I'm going to sign up for that one. That's Wednesday, the 12th of October. We've also got some other events coming up. We've got the online cyber security skills festival. I think I'm going to pass over to Joseph because Joseph wants to come in and say a few bits here.
Absolutely. So we are 2 weeks away today from our Cybersecurity Skills Festival. For anyone who's not aware yet, that is our attempt at closing the skills gap in cybersecurity. It is a jobs fair with a conference running alongside it. It's all based on targeted at new entrants into the industry, be that from education, forces, levers, etc. It is entirely free, not just to come along, but to host a stall. So if anyone is hiring for entry-level security roles at the moment, do let me know. There's still plenty of time to put up a stall and we can set you up with one absolutely free. We've got a really good virtual platform. It's really interactive. The last one we did in February earlier this year, we had 1,300 job applications made through the platform in a single day, and we're looking for it to be even bigger. We've got 36 stall holders signed up so far. We're looking to get that up to 40, so we can get 4 more. That would be fantastic. We're also looking to get 1,000 peak candidates signed up. That's up from about 800 in February, which will give us about 600 people coming along on the day, which would be fantastic. And we are currently ahead of target for doing that, so we should have well over 1,000 candidates registered to come along. So if you are hiring, you can't miss this. Thanks, Lee.
No worries. Yeah, and I'd urge everybody to get involved in that. You know, the next generation, I think there's a song in there somewhere, is really, really important on how we move forward our sector. So do get involved in that and show your support. We've got some hybrid events coming up soon as well. We've got cybersecurity for charities and non-profits happening in London. We have another hybrid event in Birmingham, reaching the boardroom with meaningful metrics and measurements. brilliant. Another one there that I need to sign up for. And then we got another one, London and online, best practices in raising cybersecurity awareness across large organizations. So we've got those happening in the future. We are also here at SASIG House. We are hiring. So we are looking for an events coordinator to join the SASIG family. So if you are in that sphere, you know people. Again, networking is key. So if you know anybody interested in a bit of a job, maybe a career change yourself, then feel free to apply for this post that we've got going here, the events coordinator, which I know with SASIG will be very, very busy indeed. So without further ado, I've took up more of your time. Sorry, yes, social media. You can get in contact with us on the website, on the LinkedIn, and on the Twitter. As they say in modern media nowadays, they usually do the click and like and subscribe thing. I'm sure we can put a like and subscribe there somewhere for everybody to get in contact. So without further ado, I'm going to pass over to our guest speaker today, who's going to take us through his session on red teaming. So, Sadi, over to you. I will switch my camera off because people do not want to see my boring background. They want to concentrate wholly on you and your slides and your presentation. I will be in the background just looking at messages and comments to end the session with later on. So do get involved, and I'll be in the background. Thank you.
Okay, thanks so much, Joseph, and good morning, everyone. And thank you for joining the SAS talk. Okay. Okay, so I think first thing first, who am I? I'm a principal cybersecurity consultant for BSI Digital Trust. I specialize in red team and purple teaming. I also specialize in container security, cloud native orchestration technology with focus on Kubernetes in cloud and AWS, Azure, other cloud environments, as well as on-premise. I'm also a penetration tester, so I perform other type of penetration testing, infrastructure applications, etc. That's who I am. The content, today's slides, particularly the contents, I'm going to go through who is the Cozy Bear is, the AKA also known as APT29. How it all started, how all this actually investigation started, how I put this slides together in terms of the content as well as the the technical content, and then we'll discuss the two attack vectors were used by the APT29, DLL hijacking and DLL proxying, and the reason behind discussing the DLL hijacking and proxying so that I can make it easier for you to digest the future slides to understand what's happening. And that's the reason actually, just briefly go through these techniques. And then I will talk about the APT29 attack analysis. So how this attack happens and how they do it and how I actually go about replicating the attack itself in terms of the attack chains and initial access and post exploitations into a Windows 10 in a secure environment. I will demo the attack. I've called it Operation Magic Theater, just a name convention for myself. And I've recorded the demo because, as you know, that Dionysian's gods of demo, it's never here. So it's always good to actually record your talks, just in case if things doesn't work in real life. Once we've gone through the demos, etc., and I will go through also the mitigations and recommendations, and from there that we can discuss any questions that you have. Okay, so who is actually APT29? So first thing first, they've got many names. They're also known as a Cozy Bear, the Duke, the Office Monkeys. They've got the security companies, security firms, they assign lots of names to these, to APT29. So different security vendor tend to have different naming for the APT29, but generally they're known as the Cozy Bear, the Duke, and the Office Monkey, and they tend to kind of be associated somehow with the APT29. They are a advanced persistent threat. That's what the APT actually stands for. They are highly sophisticated cyber espionage with focus on government and multinational organizations. And then, of course, they are a nation state actor. So they have a license essentially to hack. So there's not much of a retributions in terms of a nation state actor, because they've had the impunity from the government, the government they work for, and therefore they can go about performing their attacks and their cyber attacks and achieve their objectives, and without actually regards to any other nations or without regards to the authority at all, because they've got the license to hack, and it's very difficult for one government for another government to extradite a nation state actor. In first instances, they all actually deny that was a particular individual from this particular government. So it makes it very difficult when it's the threat actor has actually limitless impunity. Causes bear motive and objectives. So when I say cozy bear, I'm referring again back to the APT29. So I'm changing the names, but the focus is actually the APT29 as a threat actor. The primary objective is to spy and collect intelligence on nations and organizations. So they basically get into your environment, get into particular government organizations or government systems and organizations as well, to essentially spy and collect intelligence and pull those informations back to their command and control, and then obviously cascade that information to the right people to actually leverage this on a particular objective they need to achieve. The APT29 notoriously known for actually collecting lots of intelligence on organizations, particularly on kind of a defense, as well as actually any other organization that they are of interest to them. Recently, they've kind of changed their approach. They've also, decided to take another approach to actually disrupt networks as well. And occasionally, they do that for two reasons. Once, it's actually to hide their track and pretend to be they are actually cyber criminals. So, for instance, ransomware, using a ransomware as a technique to encrypt everything, in order to also show that they actually, this is not a spy-focused government nation state type of attack. It's just a cyber criminal. They're after money, etc. But also, obviously, it's another reason for adapting this approach. It's to kind of almost like delegate the responsibility to another threat actor. So it's a trick that they want to be, to avoid being basically identified. They are extremely sophisticated in their approach. They tend to hacking into a big software companies, particularly where they can lie hidden inside the network for a very extended period of time and to collect intelligence. So what I actually mean by that is they go after big software companies, and they use that as a leverage to gain access to their ultimate, basically, a place they want to be. So their objective is to use the kind of ISPs, big software companies, to get in, to use them as a platform to achieve their objective to their actually third-party companies. So they could actually also use smaller companies, and everybody could be a target if they need to achieve one particular objective. They don't mind to breach a smaller company in order for them to use this as a platform to pivot into their actually target organization. So it could be that they can hack into the IT company, where this IT company manages an infrastructure for certain companies, and from there they can use this as a leverage to gain access to the network. This is mostly their kind of a cozy bears motive and objectives, but every operations they perform, it's obviously focused on a particular objective. So I'm only kind of giving you a high level of objectives, what they actually after. Generally intelligence gathering and using those intelligence for their own benefits. Their tool sets, as you would expect, they are a nation state actor, which means they got large amount of resource, large amount of money and supports from the government to actually to build their own toolings, customize also not just actually their own tooling, but also they could also use open source tools and modify those open source tools to reuse those tools to in their attacks. So generally they are actually a group of offensive kind of developers. So they know how to develop code fast, efficient, and deployed into an existing engagements. When they hack into organizations, if they get detected, what they can do is they can quickly deploy new components, new features into their malware deployments, where they can actually counter your operations and hide and achieve their objective using these. So in short, they are a group of offensive developers, of course very skilled. They got large amount of resource, time, and also they're quite good at in terms of bypassing technical controls, evasions, initial access, and each of them obviously outside of the offensive developers, they have the same team have the operators as well, so which are focused on operations, not just actually developing the tools. That could be sometimes you've got developers that only build malware, and you have operators that are actually very good at operations in terms of how to achieve privilege escalations and focusing on one particular data source to pull this information that they need. Attack attribution. Generally, cyber attribution is very difficult, and therefore, as you can see, I've not mentioned any names here, except I've said APT29, because attribution is difficult. You can quite easily mislead a security operations analyst, or you can generally actually mislead an operation by using a particular false flag kind of a specific TTPs, so technique and tactic and procedures. Because the attribution is difficult to identify who actually is behind this particular attack and how this is done, it's very difficult for me to actually to say like APT29 it's 100%. It's actually based on this country and based on this intelligence community. So the reason for this is that technical attribution, in particular, it's hard to attribute an attack to a particular group. Is that there are stolen tools, there are open source tools that could be modified. An attacker could actually create a false flag attack scenarios, so they can somehow kind of use the TTPs based on a different group, so based on cyber criminals, but they can also use stolen tools. One of the example was the shadow brokers, another group based on a different country, APT. When their tools were compromised by a group, their tool became kind of quite public. So everybody was actually at some point using the shadow brokers leaked offensive tools. So even if it's APT29, it's actually using the shadow brokers tools. And it's very difficult to say actually for sure that okay, this tool, yes, it's actually based on those TTPs. So it's APT29. However, based on the previous analysis of these cybersecurity communities, particularly security firms. There has been Cozy Bear APT29 has been kind of a suspect of the many large cyber attacks. However, only very small proportion of these attacks are directly attributed to APT29. In my opinion, is that we only know the very high level of the attacks, but there are, of course, other attacks that is not, for the public consumption. So that information is not becoming public, and it's and that information is only probably between the intelligence communities that they share that information internally, as opposed to be public. However, there are, as I said, there's only limited attack are directly attributed to APT29. Some of the well-known Cozy Bear attacks, and particularly the DNC in 2016, Cozy Bear or APT29 were inside the DNC's network for over a year, and in particular, actually, they've compromised the Exchange servers. So the mail servers and inside the DNC servers, inside the DNC environment, and if they had access to 1 year, so obviously they knew what's happening in terms of the DNC election, etc. They were pulling all this information, using, etc. So it played a quite big role in terms of the elections of 2016. The other well-known incidents was the Dutch government, Norwegian and Dutch governments, particularly Dutch government, actually had to hand count their votes because they were under the assumptions that the APT29 were able to compromise their voting system. And so at that point, the voting system electronically was no longer credible. So they had to actually redo hand count those votes in order to make sure that it's not being influenced by the APT29. And you probably know why they want to do such things. It's obvious. The one that I've actually found it fascinating, and I highlighted in red background, is the Sunburst malware supply chain attack. And that was done by what's the APT29. They've attacked a big software company, SolarWinds, Orion, and they managed to get into the SolarWinds a CI/CD, kind of a code deployment. So they SolarWinds code, and they basically embedded their own command and control code into the SolarWinds deployments. And therefore, when the update happened, when whoever's actually used SolarWinds at some point, the APT29's code, where because it was inside the SolarWinds, they also had access to all the companies that actually installed and uses the SolarWinds. So in total, apparently there was 18,000 businesses and government organizations were impacted, and that's because the APT29 were quite meticulous in their approach. Where, when, and which company should their code actually become active? So it was quite clever. It wasn't just a case of like everyone should be infected. No, because that's just not well, in terms of managing infrastructure, it's going to be very difficult in the first place. But second is that you want to only be targeting organizations that you want to hack into. And part of their attack on the SolarWinds, the organization they actually hacked into, the first thing they did was they stole the code signing certificate. So they were using the code signing certificate, signing their own malicious code inside an organization to bypass in their technical controls. And of course, huge amount of operational security went into this particular attack, because they did not want to be caught, or they want to maintain that access for a very long time. The methodologies, how APT29 Cozy Bear actually approached to a attack. Generally, and most of their attacks, somehow it involves some targeted spear-phishing operation. Because spear-phishing operations, social engineering generally works, and they put significant amount of time, resource into planning and deploying a successful attack. In some cases, and at least recently or in the past, they've basically they used fake cybersecurity training to actually gain initial foothold inside a government and a software big software companies. So they will basically send a fake cybersecurity training that an employee needs to actually complete that cybersecurity training. It's part of their security awareness. Whilst the software engineer or the government's employee that's actually completing the cybersecurity training, the APT29 gains the initial foothold. So they install their code inside on that particular machine and establish foothold. Quite clever, because fake cybersecurity training, people they need to do this, and in the meantime it's actually done by APT29. Once the initial foothold is achieved through the spear-phishing attack, so targeted phishing attack, they try to remain undetected for a very extended period of time. So they don't go active straight away. So once they gain access, they'll stay quiet. They'll make sure that they are not being detected. They make sure they are actually not being monitored, etc., before becoming an active operation. So they've got a lot of patience, a lot of security operations, very focused offensive security developers, and very competent operators, where they know how actually the organization generally work in terms of security operations, information security, processes, policies, and etc. So they would never, just go active right away in which could happen in a real world testing environment. This is quite a focused attack. This is their methodology. And in terms of how this actually project started, for me, this research started, it was July 6, 2022. Unit 42, Palo Alto, published a paper by the article of the paper. The name of the article was "When a pen test tool go brutal, red teaming tool being abused by a malicious actor." So I'll summarize the paper for you quickly. Essentially, the brutal C2 was used by APT29, cracked versions of brutal C2. Brutal C2 is a tool that was built by Chetan Nayak, and he's based in India. He's a C2 developer, and part of the brutal C2's payloads by default tend to bypass a lot of technical controls, particularly on EDRs, endpoint response detections, and AVs. So it's quite a powerful offensive tool. However, somehow a malicious actor, so APT29, managed to get a cracked copy of, or they probably cracked it, a copy of the brutal C2. So they've kind of used this to to attack their targets. So inside the payload, inside the package, the initial payload was delivered to the target was, it was basically a self-contained ISO. Inside the ISO was LNK file, so a Windows shortcut, a malicious DLL, payload, and also a legitimate copy of Microsoft Windows Updater. So for me, seeing the Microsoft Windows Updater from the research used as an initial foothold instantly kind of made me curious, piqued my kind of interest to see how this is done. What can I do to basically replicate this attack, and I can use this in my attack chain as well. So that was actually the whole kind of a background on why I basically started looking into it, because it was a very interesting attack and it was quite successful. And I thought, let's go ahead and replicate this attack. What do we need to do this? But before I kind of go into the attack analysis, or the attack, how the attack works, etc., I need to kind of touch briefly, as I mentioned earlier, about a DLL hijacking and DLL proxying for you to actually, to digest the information in the future slides that I would go through. And the reason is for that is that it makes it easier to understand how the attack actually works. But also, like APT29 used DLL hijacking and proxying for them to gain initial foothold. So I'm just going to describe the DLL hijacking and proxy into in one slide. So DLL hijack and proxy 101. So what is actually a DLL hijack? A DLL hijacking is an attack. It forces a legitimate application into loading a attacker's DLL. It's simple as that. And in order for the application actually loads a malicious DLL, it needs to go through what's known as a DLL search order. So it needs to look for specific search order to load that malicious DLL. And the search order default is actually the process memory. So and then known DLLs registry. So if it couldn't find it in the process memory, then it drops to the known DLL registry entry. So which is the registry that's in Windows. But just to make sure that, just to kind of clarify, this particular registry, of course, you need to be admin for you to actually modify that DLL, knowing the DLLs. If you're not admin, of course, you can change that. But if you're admin, then there's no problems. When I say admin, I mean administrative privilege on the Windows machine. And the third, which is if the DLL wasn't found on the known DLL registry, then it's the third search order is the application directory, which is the interest of us, because this is what we're going to do, or this is what the APT29 did to abuse the OneDrive standalone updater to gain initial foothold. And if it couldn't find it there, then it just basically goes to system directory, system 32, and then it couldn't find there, then it goes to the system C/Windows system, then Windows directory, then the current directory, and then directory in the path. So the DLL searcher order, it needs to go through these basically for it to find the DLL that it looks for. The application actually needs to load. This exploits actually occur. So the DLL searcher occur when application dynamically resolve the DLL path. So when the application that doesn't explicitly say which path to follow to load the DLL, this basically happens. This is what an attacker actually abused, because it's not dynamically, it's not statically resolved, it's not statically specified to say, okay, go pull this DLL to load this DLL in this particular secure folder. So instead, what happens for it basically, when no explicit path is specified, an attacker could basically add their own malicious DLL and then abuse the application. So load their own DLL. Of course, the DLLs they will load, it'd be a malicious DLL. It would be a DLL that has, this problem most likely a command and control code. So, for example, if let's say an application wishes to load a DLL called proxy.dll, and if the proxy.dll hasn't got the explicit path specified, the load library basically will commence the search order, which is I've explained above. Once that DLL, once basically went through that search order, once that it found the DLL it looks for, so let's say the proxy.dll, it loads into the process memory, so it loads into the running process memory, and then it basically exports. It basically executes it, and it exports the function that it needs. So for an attacker, for us, or for APT29, is that for us to make sure that when we DLL sideload, when we DLL hijack, we need to create what's known as a DLL wrapper. So we want to make sure that when the application gets executed, we basically create a wrapper DLL exactly the same as the application needs, so the same name, and then we also need to code the kind of exported functions, and then once we've and then forward these exported functions to the original DLL. So I think it might be actually a little bit confusing, but if on the next slide I can explain what I actually mean by that. So the attack, the APT's attack, essentially what happened when I was looking at the Palo Alto's paper on the APT29 attack, is that it was a similar attack, similar kind of a package. Essentially, what they've done is that the attacker abused a OneDrive one standalone updater.exe because one of the DLL, so version.dll, wasn't using a kind of an explicit. It wasn't resolving the DLL explicitly. So it was, an attacker could basically put their DLL next to the OneDrive standalone updater, and then once you execute the OneDrive standalone updater, it would load our DLL first, and then you proxy that DLL to you create your own basically a wrapper, and then you push the wrapper exported functions to the original DLL. So here, what I'm showing here is basically a JD, so it's a job description. It's an LNK, it's a shortcut file, and it's basically when a victim double clicks on the job description, so the JD file, what happens is the OneDrive standalone updater gets executed, and then because the OneDrive standalone updater it needs a version.dll as a dependency, we create a wrapper DLL, version.dll, embed with a C2 shellcode. So we create the version.dll, and then we make sure that we have the C2 basically shellcode inside that version.dll. And then once that's loaded into the OneDrive standalone updater, what happens is, because we also have actually created a linker to proxy exported functions to the original Microsoft version.dll, except we basically rename it as, or it was actually renamed in the case of APT29 as veryson.dll. So standalone gets executed. We basically create a wrapper version.dll and then we proxy the functions that the OneDrive standalone updater needs to the original version.dll, which is by Microsoft. But because we can control the linker, we can control those exporters function in our code, we can rename that as anything we want. So in this case, the APT29 had exactly that. They had the versions.dll, which was the malicious code embedded with the C2, and then they've also kind of confused analysts using the verason.dll as which is basically the original version.dll. Also, they've also used something, part of the ISO package. They've used APT29. Well, I mean, it's obviously they want once the JD is double clicked, you want something to pop up and to distract the victim. You don't want to just a shell to execute and nothing happens. So here, what I've done is I've basically created I've called it APT29 dog, but essentially what it is that once the JD double click, once the job description is double click, we gain initial access, and then APT29 documents, it could be a job description, pops up and then it distracts the victim. So interesting part is that by default Windows doesn't show the hidden files. So if you are not configured your Explorer show hidden file, then you actually, if you hide your files, you're not going to see it. So the attackers here, obviously they hide the version.dll, veryson.dll, and OneDrive standalone updater as a hidden file. So when they deliver their package as an ISO file, and this is what the victim will actually see. So they see a job description that's only visible to the user, and then because it's an LNK file, so it's a shortcut, but the shortcut has the following properties. So it has, you know, the CD Windows with 32 CMD/start. So what's happening here is that whenever you double click JD and you don't basically you execute in the OneDrive standalone, and then also you launch in the apt29.doc, which could be any document. And this is what it looks like actually. If you look at the properties of the shortcut of JD, you see that it uses C Windows System 32 CMD//C, which is, you know, executes the code, execute the OneDrive standalone, and then once you've executed it, you establish a foothold, then also opens the apt29 documents. This is what the victim actually saw in the case of the apt29's attack, based on the Palo Alto's Unit 42's paper. So I've replicated exactly the same attack. So a bit of a kind of although I've explained it kind of high level, but here, this is what happens when actually the victim double clicks on a job description. These are the steps. The CMD starts, OneDrive Updater gets executed. OneDrive Standalone Updater is a digitally signed Microsoft binary. That's important because, you know, if you execute OneDrive Standalone, it's a Microsoft product. So that instantly gives you quite a high level of kind of a reputation in terms of technical controls you have that on that machine. It's a signed Microsoft binary, and essentially what it does, it synchronizes your local data to the cloud. So the OneDrive, basically. It's not a malicious binary, it's a OneDrive standalone, but except it was resolving the version.dll dynamically. Once the OneDrive standalone update is executed, it looks for a dependency version.dll, which will be loaded into the OneDrive standalone updater process. As an attacker, we can create our version.dll. And then when I say control, because we can create that as just a standard DLL, and then add our own C2 code, so command and control code, and proxy the required functions that OneDrive standalone updater requires to the original version.dll. So we still need a copy of the version.dll, but we will simply rename it as a vera.dll. So that when that standalone updater gets executed, it loads the version.dll, but also the vera.dll as well, because the codes that we have in the version.dll, it's our C2, but we also exported the function that requires to the original DLL. And once that's done, basically, the version.dll gets executed, it forwards all the functions to the original DLL, which in this case it was named as vera.dll. And then the C2 payload gets executed. And then the C2 payload injects into a process, which is known as a runtime broker.exe. You can control that process, but in the APT29, they particularly chose that process for a reason, because runtime broker.exe, it's a task manager process that manages applications in the Windows Store. So it's always there in a Windows 10. And then because the reason for actually injection into a new process is that standalone updated only lives for about 10 seconds and it dies. So you don't want to have command and control session only 10 seconds. You want to quickly inject your code into a runtime broker so that you can maintain a kind of a established connection to that machine. And then of course after that you maintain persistence, etc., etc. I hope that that explains what it is. And then if I can, in terms of the building this malicious DLL, so the approach is first to understand, what does the OneDrive Updater standalone needs in terms of the functions that from the version.dll. So on the left, what I have done, I basically built a proxy DLL, a malicious DLL, and as you can see in the red square, that you can see that these are the functions that basically forwarded to the original DLL, but I've called it verison.dll. So you can see that it's a get file versions, info size, and then it says forward to version verison. That's what exactly the APT done. So I thought, okay, I'm building exactly the same techniques, how they did it. Another reason, and I'm using dumping here, which is you can examine basically common object files, particularly on the exes and DLLs. That's why you can see all the exporters functions. So these are the exporter functions that are pushed to the original verison.dll. On the right, however, you can see that when I do a dumping / import, you can see that what the version.dll, what this particular process needs from the version.dll. That's why we basically implemented these three functions in our DLL. So as you can see, it's like, the ver query view, and you've got the numbers, which are the basically ordinal numbers, and you can convert them with hex as well. And then here, that's just using a dumping. I just want to do, kind of a show to you that, the imported function that it needs. So as you can see, these find string /I. These are the imported functions basically needed for us to re-implement this in our code as a linker, as an exporter to the original DLL, so that we can establish C2, but also make sure that nothing breaks. That it's OneDrive Updater needs those functions. Go find those functions in actually original version.dll, which we renamed it as a verison.dll. Okay, and this is what it also, in terms of diagram, what it looks like. Actually, hopefully that makes it a little bit more easier. The OneDrive Updater, when it loads the malicious DLL, which we control, version.dll, and then we proxy the exported function to the original Microsoft version.dll, but simply name that verison.dll. So let's look at the diagram together. OneDrive gets executed, and then it goes to our malicious version.dll. We control that because OneDrive needs the version.dll as a dependency. It loads the version.dll into a process, into the memory, and then it basically checks it executes our shellcode or command and control shellcode. That's what APT29 done. And then it's basically exports the three functions. It basically says to the version.dll, if you need those three functions, go find it in the DLL, the original DLL, but the original DLL is named verison.dll because we can control that. So at that point, obviously, when that executes, we will have full control of the machine, and we also inject into the runtime broker. And from the coding perspective, this is how it looks like. So for us to build basically version.dll as proxy, we needed to export three functions, as I mentioned earlier from the previous slides. As you can see from the screenshot on the left, we need to create a linker and export that three functions to a DLL called verison.dll. On the right, however, we need to, because as I mentioned that the APT29, they injected their code, their C2 code, into a runtime broker process. So I needed to also implement some kind of a injection technique, which shout out to Renzo. I borrowed his actually injection code. I don't have to reinvent if something is already done. But what it does essentially in this code, we need to first encrypt our code, our C2 code, so command and control code. And then, as you can see from the right slide, decrypt the payload. So we need we encrypted it with AES encryptions, and we also need to decrypt it. So just before we need to decrypt the code, our C2. Obviously, you want to do this because you don't want to get picked up by AVs and stuff like that. And then we basically use a virtual alloc. So we create a virtual. Basically, we use a virtual alloc to create a memory, and then write the. Once we decrypted it, then we can use a write process memory, inject in our code into the actual process. And that's what the injection code does. And then here, once we basically, before the injection, we need to do, I use the simple functions called try. Essentially, what I still need to do is I need to find the target that I want to inject the code into. Because APT29 injected it into runtime broker, so I thought, hey, let's just do exactly how they actually did it. So here is that if you can see int PID equal find target. The find target is a function at the top. Essentially, it finds the particular PID associated with the runtime broker, and it opens the handle, so handle hproc. And if it's basically if we have handle to that particular process, we use the update functions, which is the thread contents injection technique. I borrowed it from Benzo, and then inject my code, and then close the handle, the hproc. And once I've done that, basically, I inject code into the runtime broker, and therefore, I'll establish the C2 connection. A bit of a trial and error, but it worked. And then once the drive, kind of just for my own analysis and let's see how this attack works. It's, as you can see, I'm using the process hacker here. I wanted to see inside the OneDrive Updater, once we basically executed the code, to see if it's, as you can see here, basically the OneDrive Updater loaded both of the version.dll, but also verason.dll. So you can see that both of those are injected into the, basically loaded into the process memory. As you can see that it's under the modules. So here is that the version.dll, our code gets executed, and then it exports the functions that it needs into the verason.dll, which is the Microsoft legitimate DLL, but renamed as verason.dll. We could have renamed it anything, but I thought let's stay focused on the APT29's approach. In terms of the weaponizations, how did they actually do it? It was quite simple. They've used the ISO weaponized package. So they basically have all the files ready, and then they burn that into the ISO image. So it's an uncompressed disk data image in Windows. Once they've done that, then they can then, in my case, I basically had it added to a zip file. The reason I did the zip file is that because if I just send the ISO file to an attacker, to a victim, or if APT29 to send that, the ISO file to the victim, most likely it might actually not go through the some of the perimeter technical controls, possibly, but also Microsoft has a technical control known as the mark of the web, which I'll describe in a minute. So this is what it actually looks like. This is the process. The file gets mounted burned into a disk ISO image, and then you add that disk image into the zip file. And I kind of briefly touched on the mark of the web. So the reasons, there's a technical controls in Microsoft's, that's known as a mark of the web. So if you send for instance, if I send the ISO file directly, and if the victim actually downloaded from the internet, what happens is Microwave, it's kind of categorized in kind of a local computer, local internet, trusted, and internet. So microwave basically assigns a number 3 here, which is anything that comes from the internet. It's not necessarily a kind of a secure. Therefore, even if you actually double click on it, it gives you a kind of a warning on Windows saying that, okay, this is came from the internet. You might actually don't run this because this is malicious, etc. So we need to bypass that control as well for us to make the mark of the web basically comes from a local computer as opposed to from the internet. So here, as you can see, I am using if you look at the if you just send the if you look at the ISO file format itself, the mark of web is going to be 3. But the trick here is that if you use the ISO file, then you encrypt the ISO file using a zip with a password protected. You essentially, basically, when the marker of the web will be on the zip file as opposed to the ISO file. So when the victim sees the zip file, double clicks on it, it's password protected, adds the password, the marker of the web is no longer on the ISO file. So it gets mounted automatically, and the attack, the ISO, it's not technically came from the internet. It's the marker of the web, it's assigned a 0, so it's a local computer. And this is what the marker of the web is. As you can see from the get content zip, the stream zone identifier tells you the zone transfer con ID is 3. So it came from and also gives you the reference where it came from a Dropbox, because I will be using Dropbox to deliver my payload in the next slide and the demo. So the delivery mechanism, actually the Palo Alto Unit 42, of course, they did a great job, but they were not able to identify how the payload was delivered. So I assumed it either through some kind of a phishing email, or could be that through a link, through a URL using a social professional platform. I'm not going to name any social professional platform, but you probably know what I'm talking about. There are different ways you can deliver your payload, but here I've used the simplest, just a Dropbox, and a fictitious character basically works for a company called Magic Crypto, and his name is Pete Namlik. And here I'm sending him a job descriptions. Basically, I've enticed them with a good job offer from the professional platform. I'm sending him to his Office 365 email, and this is the kind of a bit of a context on the delivery mechanism. And then this is what happens in terms of the attack when the victim double clicks on the JD job description. So at the top, number 1, I've numbered it. It's the possible malicious payload delivery. Could be email, could be malicious URL, could be social professional platform. User actually downloads this JD zip, double clicks on the job descriptions, ISO gets mounted, and code gets executed. OneDrive basically injects, it loads the version.dll. It's our DLL, malicious DLL. Then it exports the function that it needs into another, into the original DLL, Microsoft DLL, but renamed as Verazon.dll. Once that's all done, an attack at the bottom, you see it basically achieves initial foothold. That's what exactly what happens, and that's how they actually APT29s managed to gain access to a number of organizations using that technique. They're probably still active on that. Now is the demo time. I've kind of discussed what the attack was and how the APT29 did their attack. I encourage you to read the Palo Alto's Unit 42 paper, their kind of analysis on the attack, So the demo here is that, the naming convention is just, I've decided to call it Magic Theater. For this example, Pete Namlock works for a crypto company known as a Crypto Magic. The threat actor, APT29, enticed Pete with a great job offer by a professional hiring platform. We know which one we're talking about. Then the threat actor shows the job description with Pete via Dropbox. Threat actor gets initial access to on Pete's machines, basically Windows 10 system. So, and that's what the demo looks like. So this is just a quick background. This is a Windows 10 up to date with the Defender, AMSI, and other technical controls. There's no EDR installed on this. Just to clarify, I did not write any codes to bypass technical controls in terms of EDRs, but this could be done as well. This was purely focused on Windows 10 with a Defender and AMSI active. So this is a Windows 10 on cloud. And let's start. This is Pete's machine. Pete Namlock logged into his machine. And Pete goes to his Office 365. That's Pete's email. And he's received from APT29 a file. He downloads it. It's ISO image basically, but the mark of the web is on the zip, not on the ISO. Okay, because I've password protected it. Type the password. He's already has the password because we shared with him. He opens it. Okay, it's just a file. This is the job description, but obviously properties executes the OneDrive Updater. He double clicks. Of course, it launches the OneDrive Updater and our malicious DLL, but also APT29 documents actually pops up to distract Pete. So at this point, we're basically able to inject code into a remote process on that machine, runtime broker. And then I couldn't record both of these screens at the same time because I've got one screen. And this is once that code is executed, what happens is the C2 would connect back to our command and control. I am using Mythic, and Mythic is an open source command and control. It's by Cody Thomas, and it's a feature. It's Twitter handle. So once the code executes on the Pete's machine, what happens is let me run that here. So we receive a connection back from his machine. So just a quick note here. His user is PN, Pete Namlock. His host name is client. This is her IP, and his domain is called DS Strangelove. I couldn't find it, Dr. Strangelove, so I had to have it DS Strangelove as his domain controller. And if you could look at also the description, it says yourhealthchecker.com. So it means that this is used as a redirector. So the code actually injects into Pete's Windows 10 runtime broker, and then connects back to a redirector. It's called your health checker. And then the redirector sends the traffic back to our C2. And here, C2 is command and control. Here, that's you have full control of the Pete's machine. So here, this is the IP. This is his username, and this is Windows Enterprise. And as you can see, the interesting one is a runtime broker. This is the process that we inject into it, basically. And this is what the APT29 did. And I'm using a particular agent called Apollo, modified Apollo. And it's live checked in. I can make the check-in, like the sleeping time between our command and control and the machines to 0. So I want to be in an interactive mode now. So as you can see now, sleep is 0. So I've got full interactive sessions on the Pete Snamlock's machine. But of course, in a real life, I would never run commands like that. So don't judge me on that. Who am I/all? I would never do that because that's just a giveaway to say, hey, I'm in your network. I'm just demonstrating that what you can do on that machine. So I am PN. I'm part of the part of the domain called Strangerov that uses the AD synchronizations, AD sync. And I am in the integrity of level medium, so I'm not an admin. And this is the information. Again, I am not running stuff like this in real engagements. This is like a giveaway. You don't want to be caught that easy. So IP config all, I would never run stuff like that. It's just pure demonstration. Just to elaborate on that. And now I have full control of the basically the machines. Now I can, the APT29 could, just maintain persistence on the machine, use this as a pivoting point, as a platform to basically lateral movement, escalate their privilege, hack into the companies, the crown jewels, exfiltrates those data back to their C2, evade detections, achieve their objective and their motives. That was the demo. And then in terms of attack mitigation recommendations, the first thing I would probably focus on is the user security awareness training. Make sure that your staffs, your employees are actually aware of the attack, that most of the attacks tend to come from social platforms, social media platforms, particularly professional hiring platforms, that this is how an attacker tend to establish a trust portfolio with your employees in the first place, to gain that trust, entice their employee with fantastic job offer. And if they are able to establish trust, and it's likely the employee was going to follow the instructions that the threat actor actually provide. So it's very important to actually, to ensure that your employees are up to date with the awareness training. Block ISO file format if you haven't already done that. I hope you have. Of course, AV, EDR, critical here as well. Even if they are able to bypass your EDR, even if they are able to bypass your AV, you want to know at some point. So telemetry is very important. The attackers, they always leave telemetry. For instance, if I am able to open a handle into a runtime broker process, this is a huge telemetry. A SOC should be able to pick this up quite easily. So what I'm saying is that, it's even if there's ways to bypass technical controls, but threat actors, cyber criminals, they always leave traces behind. So it's good to have those telemetry that you can quarantine and could stop the attack from progressing. It's bad when you don't know what's happening. And of course, you want to have a layered technical security, but don't overdo it. That's just my experience based on years of experience. If you have too many technical controls, you end up creating more issues. Have a logical, clean, layered technical security where you know where your assets are, where you know where your technical controls are. And of course, you want to know your organization's actually up against these attacks. Red team, purple team, it's key to basically perform regularly in order to ensure that you are up against these threat actors. That's all. So please go ahead. That's all from me. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Thanks, Sadi. Thanks everyone for hanging in there. I know we've gone over by a couple of minutes, so apologies around that. There is a feedback screen that will come up, so if people will do that. We've got a couple of questions there in the background. I think some of them have been answered. What we will do, because conscious of time and people's time, we will, Sadi can answer these in the background, and Joseph will sort out any answers that people have got. What it does show for me is that, one, things have moved on a lot since I used to type load dit run on my Spectrum 48K, but also to be really, really mindful about your third-party suppliers. Really interesting how people are using your third-party suppliers and those with maybe not as much budget and money to spend on technical controls and other wizardry to be able to stop these attacks, and they're getting through your supplier. So really, really interesting stuff there. I'm going to end it there because, again, we've gone over by a little bit. So we're going to end it. Again, thank you, everybody, for your time. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, tell everybody about the SASIG. It's a great thing we have going here. Thank you again, Sadi, for your time. Really appreciate it. And for BSI for sponsoring this. And I will bid you all a farewell and a great afternoon. Hopefully, I will see you all again soon in the future, maybe even in person with legs. Who knows? Great, everyone. Thank you very, very much. Take care. Bye now.
Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.